In this example, we want to take the next step of automating that manual process that we just went through where we created a static website. And we had defined some tasks, so in our to-do list we have these tasks. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start automating these tasks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file under week 2 called S3 static site.py. And I know that I have those tasks, so the first task that I want to accomplish is I want to create a bucket. Okay, so if I'm working with Python, I know that in order to work with S3, I have to import that boto3 library. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. And then I want to create a new bucket. And in order to do that, I have to have bucket name. So I'm going to have a variable for the bucket name. And my unique bucket name is going to be Brian's Advanced Cloud Scripting Bucket. Okay, so this is my bucket name, or instead of bucket, I'm going to call it my website. Okay, so that's my bucket name. And in order to create a bucket with that name, I have to create a boto3 client of type S3. So I'm going to call this my S3 client. Okay. And where that's coming from, this S3 client, is if I jump over to a browser, I'm going to go over to the API documentation for boto3. So I'm just typing in boto3, and you can see that I already have the S3 services set up. But if I go back to the very top of this, so I'm not actually, I just want to be on the boto3 documentation. And where I'm getting to the S3 documentation is I'm going to the API reference and then services, and then I'm scrolling all the way down to S3. Okay, and it's alphabetized, so I'm looking for the S's. Okay, so here's my S3 link, and you'll notice that if I want to create a low-level client representing an AWS S3 object, it gives me some sample code, and that's the code that matches what we have. Okay, and just to kind of stay in sync, there we are. Okay, and then ultimately what I want to do is I want to create a bucket with that bucket name. So I go back over to the API documentation, and you'll notice there's this API reference to create bucket. That's one of the available methods. So I'm going to create the bucket. I want to look at that method, and if I scroll all the way down, usually at the very bottom of this, at the very bottom of the API reference, there's usually documentation or sample code. Okay, so you'll notice some sample code here where we're creating a bucket where we supply a bucket with a bucket name. So that's what we want to do, is we want to call this create underscore bucket method. So we want to say S3 client create bucket where our bucket name matches our variable that we have on line 6, which is the bucket name. Okay, and then we're going to get a response. So create bucket response. We're going to get a response from that, and we should be able to see what that response is. So if we want to see what that response is, we can print it. Okay, so we want to create a bucket. So I would argue that that first task, I'd say, is done programmatically. We haven't tested it or anything like that, but the code is in place that we're going to be trying to create a bucket. Okay, so I think we're okay there. Our next task is to enable static website hosting. And then we wanted to supply, we had some subtasks, which is index.html and error.html as our index document and error document. So if we jump back over to the boto3 documentation, that API reference, I want to go back and I'm going to look for something about static website hosting. Okay, so I want to look for static website hosting. So if I look, you'll notice put bucket website. And again, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom for some sample code. Okay, and here's some documentation. Okay, looks like we can put a bucket website. We supply our bucket name, and then we do some website configuration. And this MD5 content, we're not supplying MD5 content. We're supplying HTML documents, and we're not encrypting them or hashing them or anything like that. So I'm actually going to eliminate that parameter. But the rest of this all looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code. And I want to bring that over to my Python script. And we didn't call it client, we called it our S3 client. And we actually have a specific bucket name and a variable, so we'll go ahead and use that variable for our bucket name. And then, like I said, we're going to eliminate this parameter, this content MD5. It's not necessary for our website. Okay, and we're also taking care of the subtasks that we had. We're supplying an error document and an index document to be error.html and index.html. So I would argue that this second task looks complete to me. Okay, I'm just going to kind of stay on the same page. I'm going to move the upload files. I'm going to move that down in priority. Okay, so upload files, I'm moving down in priority. I want to disable this block public access. Okay, so again, I'm out in the boto3 documentation. You'll notice there's the put public access block. And if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I'm not seeing any sample code with this. But I think this is the method that I am looking for this public access block. I don't want to block, or I want to remove the public access block. So let's go ahead and maybe this delete public access block is the one that I'm actually looking for. That one looks better to me. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for. Okay, so we should bring that over to our Python script. And we don't have a client, we have an S3 client. Our bucket, we're not just calling it a string, we have a specific bucket name. And then our object, our expected bucket owner, we didn't actually change that. So I'm just going to eliminate that parameter altogether. Okay, and I still have a quote there is why it looked funny in my editor. Okay, so I think we have accomplished the disable public access block. Okay, and then for our bucket policy. Okay, so our bucket policy, if you remember back to the last video, we set up a static website and we basically allowed all users to access our website, and that came from this policy generator, and we ended up with a bucket policy. So if I go back over to my my bucket that I had set up in the previous video under permissions, we have this bucket policy. I think everything in the bucket policy looks okay, except for the fact that I have a different bucket name than I do here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that policy, and I'm going to then come over to my Python script, and I'm going to say, here's my bucket policy. Okay, so I wanted exactly the same as what I had copied and pasted, except I don't want this Brian's website bucket. What I want is I want my variable name, my bucket name, bucket underscore name, which we defined at the very top, this Brian's Advanced Cloud Scripting website. So in order to replace it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a template string here. I'm going to say, here's the parameter, and then I can supply the bucket name. Okay, so the bucket name is going to get substituted into that %s. Okay, so that's the So right now you'll see it, I have bucket name here. I don't want bucket name, I want bucket policy. I don't know how I got that typo, but I want that to be called the bucket policy. And then I actually want it to be a string, so you'll see how it's not quoted right now. It's actually a dictionary. I want it to be a string. So what I can do is I can use the JSON dumps method in order to convert it to a string. So I'm going to call this my bucket policy string. And you'll notice it's got this yellow squiggly line under my JSON, and that's because I don't have the JSON library imported, so I'm going to import the JSON library. Okay, so now JSON dumps should be okay. And now I have this policy, which is a string, and I need to go back over to the API reference and say, okay, how do I actually attach a policy to a bucket? Okay, and the way I'm going to do that is there's a put bucket policy. Okay, and if I scroll down to the very bottom again, there's some samples. So you'll notice that it says, okay, you can put a bucket policy, tell me the bucket and what the policy actually is. Okay, so that's what I want to do, is I want to take our S3 client and I want to put a bucket policy where the bucket name is the bucket name variable and the policy is the bucket policy string. Okay, so that's the little snippet of code there to add the bucket policy, where we're enabling all users to have read access to the items that are in our bucket. So I think that we can mark this as completed. And then lastly, we have to upload our files. Okay, so we want to upload index.html and error.html. And this is going to be a very similar process. Okay, so what we're going to do is first I have to get a reference to that index.html file. So I'm going to say, here's my index file. It's equal to open index.html. I'm going to open it for read access in binary. I'm going to do the same thing with the error file. Okay, and most of the time I'm going to do the same thing for both, but there's my index file. And then in order to upload a file, again, I'm back on the boto3 documentation, but there's a put object method. And again, I usually scroll down to the very bottom so I can see some sample code. Okay, so you'll notice here's the sample code. Okay, and not quite what I want. Maybe it is. This one looks okay. So you'll notice the body is just a string. Well, our string is actually going to be the index file. So let's go ahead and copy this. Okay, and we don't have a client, we have an S3 client. Our body is going to be the index file. Our bucket, we have a specific bucket that we want to use, which is our bucket name. And then the key for this file, we actually want to, the key is actually the file name, so we want to call this index.html. And then we're not using server-side encryption, and we're not tagging this, so we don't actually need those fields. Okay, so we're doing that for the index file, and then we'll do the same thing for the error file. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that put object again, but this time we'll do it for the error file. So instead of index file, we're using the error file, and then we're calling it error.html. And then just to be responsible about things, I'm going to go ahead and close the index file. And I'm going to close the error file. So we read it, we upload it, and then we close it. Okay, and if all of those things are working properly, what we should see is when we run this script, there should be a website called Brian's Advanced Cloud Scripting website, and then we can check off all of the different tasks that we've automated. right? So we've automated 5 different things. We created the bucket, we enabled static website hosting, we disabled that public access block, we added our own bucket policy that allows access for users to read from our website, and then we've uploaded our 2 files, index.html and error.html. So let's go ahead and try this out and see how it runs. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Okay, and it takes a second, but you'll notice that I get an error message, file not found, index.html, so it did not find my index.html file. Interesting, I think it should have found my index.html file. I think it's not finding it because I'm running it from this advanced scripting directory. So it's using a relative path to my advanced scripting directory, which is this parent folder that I have open. I'm going to change my working directory. So I'm going to change my working directory into the weekly assignments and then week 2 folder. Okay. And then because I already ran this, some of the things that I programmatically did, I think are going to show up. So if I go ahead and refresh this, you can see that this bucket was created. I'm going to delete the bucket and I'm going to confirm it. So we weren't 100% successful in our first run. We created the bucket, and maybe some other things were successful, but I know that index.html and error.html were not successfully uploaded. So what I want to do is I want to start from a clean slate, which is to say, starting from a clean slate, I don't have a bucket, so I can recreate the bucket, and then I actually want to test, was the issue the fact that my working directory was not week 2, so then I didn't have the correct relative path when I was trying to open index.html and error.html to get uploaded. So now if I try to run this, now you'll notice that it did run successfully. So my relative path relative to where I was running those scripts was correct for index.html and error.html. Now I should be able to go back over to AWS and see, did I actually create my bucket? So that looks good. So I created a bucket. It has the correct bucket name. If I go to the properties, what I'm expecting to see is if I scroll down, I see static website hosting is enabled. Okay, that's what I expected. If I click on this edit button, I should also see the default document index.html and error.html. I should see those 2 files, and it appears that those are correctly set. Under permissions, you can see block all public access has been turned off. So that was one of the things that we did. And then if we look at our policy statement, we have a policy statement where we're allowing everyone, that's the star, to get our objects, which is all the files. And our files are identified by our bucket name /star. Okay, so the policy's in place. And then lastly, we should be able to see that we have those 2 files, index.html and error.html. It doesn't appear that way, but when I refresh it, you can see that they are here. And then I would say that the final test would be if we go to our properties and we go to our static website, can I actually access our static website? So if I open up a new tab and try to access that static website, do I see that index.html file? Okay, and what's happening here is because the index.html file was uploaded, I didn't actually set the content type. So when I am over here and I'm uploading the file, I didn't specify a content type. So the file is out in Amazon, so unless I explicitly say, hey, this is actually an HTML file, go ahead and render the content that way as an HTML file, so I let the browser know that it's an HTML file. The browser doesn't know what type of content it's trying to render, so it's not rendering it as HTML, so it's saying, hey, do you want to download that file? So that's not exactly how I want my website to work. I want it to render the page. Okay, so we have a little bit of work to do, and that little bit of work to do is I want to set the content type to be text/HTML for both the error file and the index file. Okay, so again, we got most of the way through. We verified that all of the different tasks that we had in place were working properly, but then when we did our final test to verify that the website was working properly, we saw that it wasn't necessarily working properly. It wasn't that any of our settings or any of our code was necessarily wrong, but when we upload the files, specifying this MIME type for our content type to indicate that it's an HTML file is going to be a critical step. So if I go back over and let's start again, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the bucket. So if I try to delete this bucket right now, it's going to say, no, you can't because it's not empty. I can empty the bucket. So I'm going to permanently delete the index.html and error.html file. Okay, so they're gone. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete the bucket. And I'll confirm that. Okay, and now we knew everything that we had in our list, our to-do list, is working properly, but when we tried to render the website, it was not working properly. So I'm going to go ahead and run this again. Okay, and it looks like it ran successfully. I should be able to go back over and see, okay, here's that bucket again. Here's the two files. Here's the static website, and we can copy that URL. If we go back to the permissions, we've turned off blocking public access and we have our bucket policy in place. And now if I try to access that, I think it's still cached is the issue. I think we are actually working properly, but I'm going to go ahead and open up Safari to test this out because I think what happened is that file now is cached. So I'm going to just go to Safari and you'll notice I get my Hello World page. Okay, and that's from index.html. Okay, and if I go to my error document, so error.html, you'll see, oh no, something went wrong. If I try to access a website that doesn't exist or a page that doesn't exist, matc.html, you'll see I get my error page. I think if I want to force the issue, I can hold down the Shift key and refresh this. I think I can force that. It's still caching it. I would have to clear the cache or wait for the cache expiration, which I don't want to do. But I think the fact that we put that content type being text/HTML fixes the issue. I just don't think I got a new URL, so then that URL is getting cached and it's giving us the same response of do you want to download the file. But I'm fairly confident that we've fixed that issue. Okay, so this is the automation process that we have for actually enabling a static website. Okay, so then let's say I think I'm done with the week 2 activities. Okay, so if I look at week 2 activities, it's basically working with S3 and static websites, and let's say I think I'm done. I can open up a terminal window. Okay, and I want to make sure that I'm on the week 2 branch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a get branch, and I'm going to use this flag -A to show all the available branches. Okay, and it tells me I'm not in a Git repository. That's because I'm in the parent directory, Advanced Scripting, instead of the weekly assignments. So I'm going to change my directory to weekly assignments, and I'm going to run that Git branch -A. Okay, and it shows, I'm just going to go ahead and close some of these terminals. It shows that on my system, I have a main branch and a week 1 branch, and I'm currently on the main branch. Okay, what I want to do is I want to create a new branch for my week 2 folder. So I'm going to say get branch week 2, and then I'm going to check that branch out. Okay, and now if I do a get branch -A, it'll show me that there's 3 branches. There's main, there's week 1, week 2, and you can see this asterisk indicating that I'm on the week 2 branch. I can also see that by using get status. Okay, so get status shows I'm on week 2. So let's say I'm done with the week 2 work that I want to complete. What I can do is I can say I want to do a git add all of the files in the week 2 folder. Okay, so I'm adding all of those files. Okay. And now I'm ready to commit my changes. So I'm going to do a git commit. I'm going to have a relevant message, automated a static S3 website, if I can type correctly here. Okay, so then it picked up the fact that there's 4 files in that week 2 folder, and then I'm ready to push those changes out to GitHub. So I'm going to do a git push origin, and I want to push the week 2 branch out to origin. So I want to push the week 2 branch out to origin, which is actually GitHub. Okay, so that just moved those files out to GitHub. Okay, so if I go check my GitHub repository, I don't know that I have GitHub set up in here. Okay, so I'm on the main branch right now, but if I go look, here's the week 2 branch. You'll see that in the week 2 branch I have this comment, automated a static S3 website, and if I go into that week 2 folder, here are the files that we just dealt with. Our to-do.txt file has all of those coding tasks. If we look at the Python script, it's all of the code that we just wrote to automate that process. Okay, so if I come back over to my terminal window and I do a history command, you can see those git commands that we just had. But the main 3 that we use all the time are git add, git commit, git push. But in order to actually work together, we're going to have to use these branches. So we created a branch, we checked out the branch, we are then checking the status. Are we actually on the right branch before we actually get into the rhythm of adding files, committing those files, and then pushing those files. Once we've pushed those files, so right now we have these branches, I can create a pull request to say, you know what, I actually want to create a new pull request and I want to bring in week 2 into the main branch. Okay, so I can see there's some different files, right? So it shows me the different files. I can create a pull request, and what a pull request is it's basically a merge into the main branch. So I'm going to create a pull request. Okay. And it says there's no conflicts with the main branch or the base branch. And the reason there's no conflicts is because all of my changes were in a new folder. So what I'm going to do is say, yeah, that's fine. Let's go ahead and merge them. And I'm going to confirm that merge. And now if I go look at my code base, you can see that that week 2 folder is now pulled into the main branch. Okay, so that's the workflow that we're going to use for this course.